It's good to see you guys here. Glad that you're up and about on this beautiful, sunshiny day, and hopefully you enjoy some of this fake fall weather that we've got going on for the next couple days. It should be a good time. But my name is Peter. I'm the pastor here at Hope City, and it's my privilege to welcome you guys. And if I haven't had a chance to meet you, I would love nothing more than that. After service, I'll be out in the lobby or out on the patio there, and I'm looking forward to meeting with you out there. But we're in week 3 of our series called the Red Letter Challenge. We've been taking 40 days, and we're going to work through the words of Jesus and some of the things that he has to say about who he is, right? And some of the things that are closest to his heart. And we talked last week and every week essentially that we may have gotten Jesus a little mixed up. We may have Jesus a little bit, kind of confused, or we may have put him in a box that he didn't really put himself in, or all of those kinds of things. And so we're taking a look at what really matters to him and what did he have to say about certain things in our own lives. I know that everybody in this room, we have all tried something at one point in time or another to have the best life that we could, to live life to the fullest. And I know that there are things that make a lot of promises for you. There are things that say, well, if you do this, this will happen. If you buy this, this will take place. This will make your life so much easier. This will make it better. And yet there's a lot of us that would say, I've tried it and it did not work for me, right? And yet Jesus says something very, very similar. He says this in John 10:10. We've been hanging our series on this, that the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. But I've come that they may have life and life to the full. This is the invitation that Jesus makes for you and for me. He says, listen, I want you to know that there is something even better for you than what you ever could have imagined. That your life, you can live it to the full. And this is what we talk about. We think about this all the time of how do we have a full life? How do we get a full life? And then what happens is we pull our smartphone out or we jump on something and we start looking at Facebook or Instagram and we look at everybody else's full life. And we start saying, well, my life doesn't look as full as that, or I'm not living life as, to the fullest like they are. And we start thinking, man, I wish my life looked a little bit more like their life. And we begin to settle into some of these rhythms, and we say, I wish that it looked just a bit more this, that, or the other thing. And this is where the Red Letter Challenge steps in, because Jesus says, listen, we want you to live life to the fullest. In fact, I've come so that you would experience life to the fullest. That it wouldn't be a life of comparison. It wouldn't be a life that, of striving and chasing after certain things. He says, no. I want you to come to me and experience the fullness of life. But for me, I'll tell you some things. There's any number of things that can keep you from experiencing full life. But for me, there have been 2 words that have rung true in my life that have kept me from that fullness. And it's these 2 words right here, pain and heartache. Pain and heartache. These 2 things, especially from other people. They've been caused in my own world, or somebody stepped in and they said something with their words that was hurtful to me, or they did something with their actions and that actually hurt me, or they said things about me in gossip and it was hurtful there. Pain and heartache had caused these 2 things. In fact, in your notes, I put those 3 words, whether it was words, actions, or gossip. I'd love for you to think right now, just think kind of with me, which one of those 3 is the greatest challenge for you? Which is the hardest one for you to deal with? Maybe it's words, something that somebody said about you. To you. Maybe it's actions that somebody did to you, or it's gossip that somebody has said about you. Circle one of those things right now in your notes of what has been the hardest for you. But these are stumbling blocks for people all over the place, pain and heartache. And it keeps people from living life to the full. Because you know what happens in these moments is that what happens is you and I, we play out the things that people have said over and over and over again. We kind of run the highlight reel of other people's offensiveness, and we say, well, how could they have done that to me? Or how could they have said that about me? Or how could they said that to me? And then we get caught up in this vicious cycle of being hurt over and over and over again, explaining to myself, in fact, why what they did was wrong. And we just get stuck in that hamster wheel. But here's another interesting thing, though. Is that you and I, we can't prevent what people say to us, about us, or what they do to us. But we can we can 100% control our response to it. We can control the way in which we respond to people's thoughts, their actions, their behavior, and certainly their words. But here's another thing I know to be true. I know that many of us, when we get into situations of pain and heartache like this, we actually pull it in closer and we begin to harbor the hurt. We let that kind of hang out with us for a while. And we say, no, this is a safe place. Come on. Like all that hurt, we just bring it in tight and we hold on to it and we keep it close. But rather than doing that, rather than harboring the hurt, what we're going to find today is that Jesus actually has something that is freeing for you and for me. That Jesus has an invitation to live life to the fullest, but it requires that you and I grow in forgiveness. Forgiveness is one of these very interesting things that you and I, we struggle with forgiveness if we're being real, if we're being totally honest. Many of us have a hard time forgiving other people. Because somewhere along the line, somebody told you that if you're actually going to forgive somebody, that there's a whole bunch of ifs that step in, right? Like one of the first things that we'd say is that if I forgive somebody, it minimizes what they've done to me. I'm not about that. I'm not going to do that, right? I can't forgive somebody because if I forgive them, then it looks like what they did really doesn't matter. Or maybe we say things like, if I forgive them, it means that I've got to forget what they did. And I can't possibly forget what they did. You can't forget what's happened to you. Why? Because it hurts so bad. Because the pain and the heartache is so real. And you say, I can't forget that. Let me tell you, that's like the least biblical thing that you could possibly say about forgiveness. Nobody in the Bible ever said that you need to forgive and forget. That's not even the case. In fact, it's actually impossible for you to forgive and forget. Because why? You can't try to forget anything. Like, men, we do it really well. But you can't try to forget. Like, you can't actually, because when you try to forget, you say, oh yeah, what am I supposed to forget? I'm supposed to forget that I needed to do that thing. I got to forget about that thing that I'm supposed to do. I got to forget about that thing. And what all you're doing is reminding yourself over and over and over again, therefore not allowing yourself to even forget. So listen to me. If you think that for a second that forgiveness means forgetfulness, then we need to talk a little bit more. One of the third and final ifs that we throw up is that we say, well, if I forgive them, it means that everything just has to go back to normal again. And some of you couldn't possibly go back to normal after what's happened to you, been said about you, been done to you. And you're so afraid to forgive because you're afraid that you're going to have to go back to that person. You're going to have to remarry that person, or you're going to have to, restore that relationship. But listen to me. Restoring a relationship and forgiving somebody are two totally different things the Bible teaches us. Forgiveness is instant, but restoration, trust takes time. It's a process built over a long period of time. The Bible says that those two things are very, very different. See, you and I, when it comes to forgiveness, we have a whole bunch of ifs. And you know what's funny? Is that all these questions that we have about forgiveness, it's been people have struggled with forgiveness for centuries upon centuries upon centuries. In fact, in Matthew chapter 18, we're going to see in verse 21, we're going to start there, that Jesus is asked about forgiveness by the people that know him the best, that love him the most, and they still don't get it. They're still asking the question, what's the deal with forgiveness? So this morning, we're going to look at the words of Jesus, look at what Jesus actually has to say about forgiveness. And I'd invite you to turn to page 671 in the Bibles on your chairs around you, or you can click over in your YouVersion app, or follow along in the events tab of YouVersion with what's happening here this morning. And so look at what Peter asks Jesus about forgiveness. Peter comes to Jesus and he says these things. He goes, hey, listen, Lord, how many times should I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Like up to 7 times? Is it 7 times, God, that I have to forgive somebody? Because listen, Peter, in his day and age, he thought he was doing an amazing thing. He's like, Lord, I'm going to get my gold star right here. You can pin it on my chest, like right here. It goes on my tunic. And because I'm willing to forgive somebody 7 times. Because in that day and age, there was this teaching that went around that said you only had to forgive somebody 3 times. And if it was after the 3rd time, write them off. They're dead to you, right? Like, cut them out. And he goes, what if I doubled it and added one, right? Like, I could be a hero, right? Like, this is amazing. And he's expecting Jesus to be like, oh, good job, Peter. That's awesome. And yet, Jesus looks at Peter and he says this. He goes, I tell you not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Quick math. How much is that? 490. Awesome. Is Jesus saying, listen, you have to forgive your neighbor 490 times? Is that what he's saying? Because I can almost hear Peter coming to Jesus being like, listen, Jesus, I got this neighbor, man. Like, they're driving me up a wall. All I can do is like, how many times do I got to go over and be like, hey, listen, I've got a kid that sleeps late, early at night, and your music is annoying. Like, how many times do we have to have that conversation, Jesus, before I can write him off? But Jesus isn't saying 490 times. He's actually illustrating a point that says, listen, buddy, forgiveness is, there's no limit to how much you should forgive someone or what they should be forgiven of. And because forgiveness is so hard, it's such a hard thing for even for you and I to understand, Jesus says, you know what, let me tell you a story. Let me tell you a story to help you understand what I'm talking about. Anytime that Jesus starts to tell a story, you know that what he's actually trying to do is to help teach and illustrate an incredible point. And this morning is no different. So look at what Jesus says to Peter and the rest of the disciples about forgiveness. He tells them this story. He says, therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. And as he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 talents. Now, a talent was a unit of measurement, right? And it was actually one of the largest units of measurements. So he owed him a massive amount of money. And this guy was brought to him, and since he was unable to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to pay the debt. Now, the servant fell on his knees before him, and he begged him. He said, be patient with me, and I'll pay you back everything. Like, this is absolutely incredible. You see what's happening? Is that there's a guy that is unable to pay his debt. Like, he couldn't possibly pay it back. It was so big. And he's begging, he's pleading before this guy, before the king, before this one that owned all of this stuff, he owed this to him. And look at what Jesus says that this man replied. He said, the servant's master, he took pity on him, and he canceled the debt, and he let him go. The servant's master, this guy, he looked at what this guy was saying. He looked at him, he saw him for who he was, and he had pity on him, and he canceled the debt. He didn't say, well, listen, if you could pay 1,000 talents right now, we'll wipe the other 9 away, right? Or if you could work it off over the course of 3 months, then we can work it out. No, he said, listen, I'm going to cancel it for you. I'm going to cut it off. You're not going to owe this to me anymore. See, the story that Jesus is telling us, it's not to make us great accountants. It's not to make us be like really wise with money. It's actually to make us better people, to help us understand what God has done for us. He's trying to help us understand that forgiveness and the power that forgiveness has in our life. See, right here, we see Jesus illustrating an incredible point about forgiveness. And it's that forgiveness gives up the right to get even. This is where forgiveness begins. Somebody asked me this morning, how do I know when I've forgiven somebody? Well, the very first step is that when you give up the right to get even, when you give up the right to go chase it down and hold and get justice, right? To get revenge. The Bible says in Romans chapter 12 that you and I, we should never avenge ourselves. Leave that to God. For he said that he'll repay those who deserve it. Romans 12 verse 19. And yet you say, oh, but man, if I could just get even. If I could just... And you fill in the blank with whatever it is, that person that hurt me. And then you hear this and you're like, man, that's just so unfair. It's unfair that I can't get even or get back or hold them accountable. See, nobody ever said that forgiveness was fair. Was it fair for Jesus to forgive everything that you've ever done or let you off the hook? Was that fair? No way. In fact, Bob Goff said it this week on Instagram. He posted this. He said, grace never seems fair until you need some. And I would say, forgiveness never seems fair until you need some. And then all of a sudden it's like, This is amazing. Everybody should have forgiveness, right? Like, or I deserve forgiveness, but you don't. See, this is the tension. This is the place in which we find ourselves is we want to be forgiven, and yet we don't want to forgive anybody because we want to hold them accountable. We want to get what we're owed. See, grace is that unearned merit, that unearned favor of God, and forgiveness is filled with grace. But the Bible does say this, that one day God's going to have the last word. But it may not be your word. See, the Bible tells us that we're going to let God settle the score so that you can live in peace in your heart and that you can get on with your life. Leave the justice part to God. The starting point is when you and I, when we give up our right to get even. But here's the thing, like the other part of this that I fully recognize is that you and I, we will struggle. We will struggle every time until we learn to give up the right to get even. There will be something that is built up in your heart. And in fact, two things. I'll tell you these two words, resentment and bitterness. And I want to show you what resentment and bitterness do. Because resentment and bitterness, it's like kind of two sides of a pair of handcuffs. You know, resentment and bitterness, when somebody does something to you and you feel like they owe you something, you put the handcuff on, and then you strap the other side to that person, or at least you think it's going to that person. You've built up all this resentment, and you drag them around with you. You built up, some bitterness, and you drag that around with you. And before you know it, you have this gigantic weight that you're holding on to, that is literally shackled to your wrist. That resentment and bitterness, they hold you back. And resentment and bitterness, you and I think that it's going to help us move forward. But these two words, doctors would tell you that these are some of the most unhealthy emotions that we can ever have in our life. These two things are the most unhealthy things for you to harbor and hang on to. And resentment and bitterness, all they do is they don't change the past. It's not going to make anything different about what's happened to you. It just messes up your present. It messes up what's actually going on in your world right now, because listen, you can't walk away from this when you haven't done something inside of you. You're stuck in the past and you hold on to resentment and bitterness, and they continue to hurt you today. See, the servant though, he's forgiven of all this debt, and look at what he does next. You think he'd run out and be like, this is the greatest day of my life, and go home, hug and kiss his wife, and take the kids out. They're going, we're going anywhere you want for lunch today, right? Like, we can finally afford it again. But look at what he does. Something totally different. It says that servant went out. He found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. Now, 100 denarii is minuscule in comparison to 10,000 talents. 100 denarii is like about equivalent to 100 days worth of work. And he says it this way. He goes, he grabbed him, he began to choke him, and he said, "Pay back what you owe me," he demanded. And his fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, "Be patient with me, and I will pay you back," right? It's like we should be kind of clued into some of the things that this fellow servant just said. Feels a little bit like we've heard this before, and yet these very same words that this guy used with the master. And look at what happens. Look at what this guy says and what he does. It says, but instead, he refused. He went out and he had the man thrown into prison until he could pay off his debt. This guy, he went full court press. He was like, "You owe me 100, I'm getting 100. And there should have been that deja vu moment of like, whoa, yeah, I feel like I just heard that, and things changed in my life, and so we're going to let it change in yours. And yet, he held his feet to the fire and said, no, I'm going to hold you accountable. And this guy missed out on a critical piece of what it means to forgive someone. And it's something that you and I have to grow in and we have to learn. And it's point two today is that forgiveness is for all. Forgiveness is for everybody. There isn't a person on planet Earth that shouldn't be forgiven. There isn't a person that you would say, listen, they don't really need my forgiveness. Like, they can kind of continue to just live life like that. No. It's not about that. In fact, forgiveness, if you remember what I said, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetfulness, and it also doesn't mean normalcy. It's not going to mean everything goes back to normal, and it doesn't mean that you forget what they've done. But forgiveness must be given to everyone, even those you don't feel like forgiving. Otherwise, you're going to walk around shackled to a burden and to a weight that you were never meant to bear. In fact, that Jesus says, I've got a better way for you. I know this because I lived this. Like this is actually a pretty strong picture of the way that I lived my 20s. See, in my 20s, I had a lot of hurt early on in my 20s from some people that they hurt my family. Not my immediate family, but they hurt my parents, my siblings, and I. There was a lot of betrayal. There was a lot of things that were said. So words were said, words were weaponized, and things were said that I can't ever forget. And yet, I found myself waking up in the morning and thinking about this thing, and I went to bed at night thinking about that thing, and then I did that daily, and then that turned into kind of months, and then months went by, and they turned into years, and before you knew it, a decade had gone by, and I had been harboring this anger and this bitterness and this resentment in my heart, carrying it around with me. Now, as the years went by, I would say, I didn't think about it every day necessarily, but when I did think about it, it stirred up this thing in me. And this past week, I was actually telling somebody that when I looked in the mirror in those moments, I saw a person that I didn't really like. I saw a person that I didn't really know or recognize, but was definitely alive and well inside of me. And I would tell you that in that, there was no reason to forgive them. I think that the things that they did, even to this day, are hurtful and they were hard, and yet I was the one stuck in that position. So fast forward, it's 10 years after this whole thing's happened, and I jump on Facebook one day, like we all do, and there it was. There was a friend request waiting for me in my notifications from a guy by the name of Dave, who I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. Do you not know what you did 10 years ago? And see, here's the deal. For 10 years, I had what I thought I had Dave on the other end of these handcuffs. And what I didn't know was that I was the only one cuffed up. Dave was he was doing his thing for 10 years. 10 years had gone by. And I was holding on to the resentment and the bitterness. A friend request on Facebook revealed to me that there was something wrong with me, that I had the problem, not him. I mean, I'm not excusing his behavior, but my response to his behavior, it had impacted me for 10 years, a decade of my life. In fact, I wonder if you were to jump on Facebook right now, maybe you're already on it, I don't know, but if you were to jump on Facebook right now, and you start scrolling, would you pay attention to the emotions in your heart? Would you pay attention to that when you pull it up and you're like, oh, there's Dave. What does that feel like for you? Because a good test of whether you've forgiven someone or not, or maybe there's something there that you might need to forgive, is that immediate emotional reaction to somebody. Sometimes I call it like a social allergy when you're scrolling through and you're like, that person just aggravates me. But there's another thing when somebody actually angers you when you see what's going on in their world. And I wonder if by any chance that you would say, maybe I identify with this a little bit. That this person, I'm actually kind of shackled to them. See, unforgiveness puts you in the cuffs while letting the other individual just run free. Jesus goes on with this story, though, and he says this, that when the other servants, so everybody else sees this, and they saw what's happened, they were greatly distressed, and they went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in, and he said, you wicked servant, he said, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to, right? Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? In his anger, his master turned him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you. See, this is the picture Jesus is helping us with. Unless you forgive your brother from your heart. Jesus is saying, like, listen, forgiveness is for all. Like, he's revealing us a principle to us, and in many ways, he's actually foreshadowing what is to come. See, Jesus was going to die on a cross. He was going to stretch his arms open wide. And on either side of those arms, it was like he had, a pair of handcuffs here and another set on this side. And he was saying, like, listen, your sin, your garbage, I'm going to take that. I'm going to cuff that here, and I'm going to take that, and I'm going to forgive you for that. The entire world would know forgiveness because of what Jesus did and what he was about to do. And yet in this story, the master forgave this man of so much, and he was unwilling to forgive even just a little. See, forgiveness reminds us that what Jesus has done for you is greater than what anyone could do to you. That what Jesus has done for you, the forgiveness that Jesus provides you, is far greater than what anybody else could do to you, how anybody else could hurt you. And when you're tempted to think about just how awful that person is who hurt you, or how offended you are or let down, forgiveness reminds you that Jesus forgave a debt, he forgave the hurt, he forgave the offense, he forgave everything that you've ever done that caused pain and heartache. In fact, your most embarrassing day, that debt is canceled. You're forgiven. And yet you and I, we run around like bill collectors and we're like, hey, you need to pay up. You need to pay up. I know what you said about me. Like, you owe me this. And when you've been forgiven of so much, it should cause you to change. It should cause you to forgive. There's something inside of us that causes us to be different and respond differently. Colossians 3:13. It says it this way, that we should bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord has forgiven you. The way that you've been forgiven, you and I are encouraged to forgive. Now that's a challenging statement because I know how much I've been forgiven from. I know my very worst days. I know my worst behavior, my worst actions. And to know that God has forgiven me of that, and I can't turn around and forgive you of some minor offense or infraction. I mean, have you ever wondered why Jesus talks about forgiveness so much? Like, why is this so important to him? It's because bitterness and anger, like being chained and shackled to something for all of your life, is never his intention. What does he say in John 10:10? He says that the thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy, right? The thief comes to shackle you to pain, to shackle you to heartache, to shackle you to bitterness and resentment, but I've come so that you may have life and life to the full. This doesn't look like full life. This doesn't look like a life worth living. Jesus has come for you to experience life, and one of the quickest ways for you and for I to get rid of bitterness and anger and resentment is actually through forgiveness. Because look at this, I want you to see something, that when you forgive others, it actually frees you. Forgiving others is what takes the cuffs off of you and actually says, you know what? I don't need those anymore. Like, I don't need that. Because there's an amazing truth about this, that the more you hold on to this hurt, the more that you say, oh, no, I couldn't possibly let that go because you don't understand what they've done to me, Peter. Right? Like, you don't know what that's like. The more you hold on to the hurt, the more you focus on the offender. And the more that you focus on the offender, the more that you actually move towards the offender. And any psychology book will tell you this, that whatever you focus on, you move toward, you end up becoming, right? Like, here's the point. If I don't release them, you're going to end up resembling them. You say things like, oh, I'll never be like my mother, right? Right, good try. The more that you focus on the person who hurt you, the more you become like them. And I'm telling you, you've got to let go. Because this is not the kind of life that you want to live. This is not the kind of life that Jesus wants you to live. And there's no better time than for you to do that today. See, you may be really good at forgiving some people. You may be really good at forgiving your spouse or forgiving your kids, but your coworker, not a shot. Your mother-in-law, probably not. You might be really good at forgiving your parents, your siblings. But there's a group of people that you just can't understand Why should I forgive them? I want to remind you that forgiving others frees you. Maybe there's a hidden part of your life that you feel handcuffed to. And it's shame that's kind of keeping you there. I want to remind you that forgiveness is freeing. That freedom is found in that. And so seek out forgiveness too. And then, you know what else is, you and I, one of the greatest things that we can ever do is just to remind ourselves of how much we've been forgiven from. Like when you're tempted to believe that you really are the greatest thing that's ever happened in this world, like just take a hot second and think back to some of those days that you might not be proud of. Remind yourself of some of the times when you found yourself in a position that, you would never, ever want to go back to. And just remind yourself of how much that God has forgiven you from. Because when we understand that the God of creation loved you so much that he was willing to shackle himself to your sin so that he could forgive you and have a relationship with you, it is mind-blowing to think that God loves me so much that he wants a relationship with me. And this morning, we're going to remember exactly how much God loves us and what we've been forgiven from by taking communion together. So on my left and my right is the communion table, and there's a rice cracker there and a bowl of grape juice, very simple. But in fact, today, the words of communion that you may have heard it called the Eucharist. Maybe that's kind of your church background or something. And the word Eucharist actually just means with thanksgiving. And today, that's exactly what we're doing. We're coming before the Lord with thanksgiving, saying, God, thank you for all that you've forgiven me from. And this morning, I want to invite you. I want to invite you to do something. I want to challenge you. And this might be the hardest challenge that you will face in this entire series. I want to challenge you. Who do you need to forgive? Who do you actually need to forgive in your own heart and in your own mind? Because I have no doubt that in a room this size with this many people in here, there is somebody who has been deeply wounded by another person. You have been hurt in ways that you wouldn't wish on your enemy. And when you hear me say things like, you know what, we need to forgive people, you're thinking, I don't know if I could ever do that. And I want to remind you that as fresh as that feels right now, whether that's been months or years or however long it's been since that person has hurt you, that today, that freedom from that is available to you. You can find forgiveness from the Lord and you can give forgiveness to others. And there's really only one way to find yourself in that life that Jesus invites us to, that life to the fullest. It's by coming to him. It's by coming to him, and when he forgives you, it gives you an opportunity, a little bit of a perspective change to begin to forgive other people. And then you're going to find that, man, all the things that I was being held down by are gone. And I start to live that life that Jesus invited us to. And so in just a few seconds, I want to invite you, as you're ready, to come forward to the communion table, to take one of those rice crackers and dip it in the juice, and to allow that to hit your tongue. And when the sweetness of that grape juice hits your tongue and your sensory, your taste buds hit that, it starts to translate to your brain of, man, this is an incredibly sweet juice, to remind you of the sweetness and the goodness of God in your life, of all that he's forgiven you from. And allow that to permeate into the depths of who you are and to begin to forgive other people. To say, you know what, I'm not going to hold you accountable to this anymore. I'm going to give up my right to get even. There's nobody off limits to this. You're not off limits. I'm not off limits. God has forgiven you. There's not a person in this room that you could have done something or said something that would prevent God from loving you. So maybe this morning you came to church and you felt unworthy, unlovely, unlovable. It's the farthest. That is a lie from Satan. that he wants to steal, kill, and destroy you. But Jesus wants you to experience life to the fullest.